Okay, so back to these questions here. We'll try to take them one at a time. So if the Supreme Soul were Vishnu, or Creator, was so complete, then why will it create subparts of itself and then inflict pleasure and pain upon it? Well, it's for experience. We have to remember that many sages use the idea that this is a dream, and they liken our experiences to a dream. And it's a very useful way of considering it, because if you really analyze your dreams, and you realize that within the dream, all those things that you experience are you, so they're all images within your head. Well, the same thing here in this particular experience that we're having right now. Everything that you experience, every person, every thought, everything is an aspect, an expression of this infinite self. So just like when you're dreaming, you're not really no one's really getting pain, no one's experiencing pleasure. It's all an imagination, all within the head of this divine creator. The same thing here is happening. And that's a hard thing to get your mind around for a couple reasons. Number one, because just like when you're in a dream, if you've not trained yourself to dream lucidly, it seems very real. There's no control. Nightmares can be horrific. The greatest joys can be, heart-melting. And if you're not aware that it's a dream, you're at the mercy of those things. So again, when we go back to the idea of yoga and meditation, what we're doing is we're learning to lucidly dream in this life. And the problem with this particular approach is that, as I mentioned previously, it can give a lot of people excuses to do whatever they want. And the reason there is this idea of pain and this idea of suffering, aside from the fact that there is an aspect of consciousness that desires the experience in some way, shape, or form, is that the pain that comes is by not being consciously in harmony with the rest of the dream. If the entire dream was in conscious harmony with itself, there wouldn't be this pain. So just like when we dream, we go through a period of awakening or becoming more lucid within our dreams. In this life, as we're moving from an unconscious state where we're just at the mercy of random thoughts, random desires, which is what causes us pain, essentially, to finding that direction, that point to head towards, whether it's merging with God, if you want to have that in mind, if it's being the best musician, whatever it is, it's all going to lead to the same point if you treat it as devotion, if you treat it as devotional practice. Then everything starts to line up to give success in that particular approach. So essentially, there's no infliction of pleasure or pain. It seems that way when you are caught up in the mind. And again, this is not to make light of anyone's suffering. But if we're going to be talking about this from a yogic perspective, then this has been my experience in meditation, and other people have mentioned it as well. And one thought does occur to me in this regard, is that as long as you see things from the viewpoint of a human being, you're going to experience the consciousness of a human being, which includes suffering. And let's just take Ramana Maharshi, for example. It's my thought, based on his readings, that maybe he wasn't seeing the world in that way. Maybe he was seeing everything and everyone as an expression, an aspect of himself. And so these things that occurred didn't necessarily bother him because they were a part of the bigger picture. Nor was he elated or overjoyed at, great success or pleasurable things, because it's all one thing. And when you're in that state, most people don't want to go into that state. Why? Because there's no adventure. There's no drama. And so why do we inflict pleasure and pain? So we have the sense of adventure and drama. And I've used that example before. Most people don't read novels to where there's no bad guy. And most people don't watch entertainment where there's nothing to overcome. And the same thing, as long as you're attuned to this world, that's going to be the the experience. Now, you can transcend it. That won't be very popular with your friends or your family. That won't even be very popular with the world. You can transcend it, and then once you pass, once you die, maybe you'll go to a realm where these things don't exist anymore, and that's very possible. You decide that you move into that aspect of yourself where this pain and pleasure doesn't exist. But for now, the reason we're all here in a world of pleasure and pain is because there's something going on within our individualized aspect of consciousness which resonates with it. So we have to go beyond it. But we always have to remember that going beyond it, going beyond pain, also means you go beyond pleasure. And that's the one thing that most people don't want to do, which is why pleasure and pain is an addictive cycle. Because as soon as you get pleasure, pain follows. And once you're in pain, eventually pleasure comes. So it's this constant loop. And again, the subtlety of all this comes into play because it's hard to break free of that because it just doesn't come from things like drugs or sex or having more money or fame. All those things pass as well. There are also subtle little things within your consciousness that you want to hold on to. And if you want to hold on to them, you're going to have the capacity to lose them as well. So it's not an easy process. So the Supreme Soul is the thing that initiated karma. And is it fair that the subparts are exposed to karmic actions? Well, if you think about the world as a fragmented place, where there's you and me and all these separate things, well, yes, that doesn't seem fair. But that's not the truth of the matter, and that's where the illusion comes into play here, is that we're all related. And that there is only karma as long as you are involved in time and space. And if you think about this, again, this is something to contemplate. And you have to get into contemplative practice because these things need to be answered on your own terms. You need to get into a space where you are clear and alert and awake. And then you need to ask yourself, all right, well, what is karma? Or who is experiencing this karma? So this karma that you think that these individualized units are being exposed to, you need to ask who or what is experiencing this. So you got to do that first. And what you'll find is, the more you contemplate that, you will start to realize the self that is experiencing this, and then you won't have these questions anymore. So then, is there good and bad karma? Well, technically speaking, no. There's not good or bad karma. There's the results of actions, thoughts, and behaviors. Someone says, don't eat meat. Well, that's a human rule. A human said that. Someone says, you have to be charitable. Well, again, that's a human rule. It's a human karma. And as long as you identify with the fact that if you're a charitable and a good person, that good results come, well, you're linked into that karma, that's how it works. Okay? Good and bad, how can you decide what is good and what is bad? Maybe, these are all things that you can consider. Maybe a person gets killed. And maybe that person who got killed was going to murder 20 other people. So you can say it's a bad karma that someone got killed, but then you don't know that. You can't know that. Because who knows what that person is going to do later on in some shape or form. Whether something's a good karma. Well, there are many things that go right that end up turning into bad situations. So this whole idea of good and bad karma, quit thinking about it in black and white and good and evil, and think about it in regards to what do you want to experience as this individualized aspect of consciousness, and then start aligning your thoughts, actions, habits, the things you learn, the people you hang out with, that will take you in that direction, that will focus you on that direction. And then your karma will be in relation to what you want. So someone else might say it's bad. The moment I decided to start practicing meditation and yoga, well, my grandmother thought that was a bad karma because I was Catholic. And so I was going against the teachings of the church that I was raised in, that she was raised in. So that's a bad karma from her perspective. My perspective was a great karma. I got away from a church I didn't necessarily resonate with, certain things, and I found a path that was very fulfilling for me. So always got to remember this idea of good and bad karma. It depends on what you're identified with. And we'll take it one step further to give you something to contemplate. I mentioned Vedic Yoga already, and there was that idea that I am that I am everything. In Vedic Yoga, they put forth this idea that you are everything. You learn to see everything as yourself. Then it also goes on to say that you are not the doer of actions. And they say this in the Bhagavad Gita too, that you are entitled to action only, meaning you act appropriately in whatever situation arises, but you are not entitled to the fruits of that action. I mean, whether it goes good or bad, that's not up to you, and that's not, you don't get that. That's not for you to identify with. So I started contemplating that. Well, if I am everything, and yet I'm not the doer of actions, I've covered this before, then what's going on? Because that's obviously in contradiction. And as I was contemplating that, the interesting experience occurred was that the idea that something's going on in the first place is an illusion. Everything that is. And again, this is where I mentioned earlier in the video that sometimes answering these questions you end up talking like a senseless person. So just bear with me and try to see where I'm going with this. So if you've ever seen one of those books where there's a series of pictures, like drawn pictures, and if you flip through the book, it looks like the pictures are moving. So it's a series of illustrations, like it's how a cartoon is put together. You know, you flip through the images, and the image moves a little bit each time, and it seems like it's moving as you flip through the pages. So what we want to try to do is try to break out of this idea that there's a linear time, meaning that, you know, it's now, I don't know, 1:40 p.m., and soon it's going to be 2:40 p.m. That's linear time. We need to break out of that. And the mind works in linear time, which means the second that you stop the mind or get away from the mind, then you experience timelessness. So that's another matter altogether. But the point being that the world, our experience, are essentially like a gigantic, enormous collection of these still life images. And it seems like things are moving, like things are happening. But what's actually happening is that those things are already there in place. It's just our consciousness, ourself, not our personality, not our mind, not our body, not this thing with all the preferences and ideas that gets upset or happy, not that, but the thing which experiences, which witnesses all this, is just simply moving through these still life images. Some are going through one type of book, some are going through another type of book, and you can jump around, but again, that's a little bit more, it takes a little bit deeper contemplation. But the idea is that what I realized by contemplating these what I consider to be irreconcilable things, that I am everything, yet I'm not the doer. It led to that understanding. So you have to contemplate these things. So these questions that you have, maybe what I'm going to say can stimulate a direction for you to contemplate, give you something to think about that can help you. So if I say something that resonates with you, take it, go meditate a little bit and contemplate it until you get the answer. And this doesn't always happen immediately, meaning you might not get the answer until you've contemplated this for a couple months. Contemplating, I am everything, yet I'm not the doer, I sat with that for a good couple weeks before I actually felt an intuitive response of what that meant. And even then, I just tried to describe it to you. I think I failed profusely. I don't think I could describe to you that process, but maybe it's going to stimulate an idea that you can follow up on as well. So anyway, consider this, that a lot of these ideas that we have of God, of karma, of good and bad, of bad karma, good karma, moksha, liberation, for us to really grasp these things, we have to have a solid meditation practice, and we need to step by step, one by one, ask ourselves, what does that word moksha mean? What does that word karma mean? What does good mean? What does bad mean? Once we get all these things worked out, then we can put the pieces together and understand internally what's actually going on in the best way we can through our mind, body, and consciousness, and then expand beyond that, which is beyond the mind, beyond time. And this is essentially what's happening with a meditation and contemplative practice that takes years. So you get on the right path, one that suits you, stick to it, keep it simple, follow it through, keep looking in that direction, stay focused, and then you get the results. Now some other questions. Okay, the idea that moksha truly exists and that we'll reach a state of spiritual enlightenment where there's such knowledge and compassion that will take birth to teach others. I don't think that's the way it goes. I think if you are sentimental, then that seems like a nice idea. As long as you wake up yourself, you influence others. The idea that people come back to teach others, that might be a possibility. I don't know. But it's my sense that compassion is seeing people for what they are, as an expression of ourself, the infinite consciousness, and that is all that we can do, because we all have to work out our karma for ourselves. As I mentioned earlier, the idea of teaching others, that's a really difficult notion, because you can only embody something, and if someone sees it within you, and they too want to experience it, they can do what you do and experience it. But as far as this idea that, there is a savior, or that you come back to to give salvation to others, I don't think that's appropriate. So if moksha is just an illusion to improve oneself, the soul takes birth again and again as devotion to God or out of compassion. The soul only takes birth again and again as long as there is desire there. So if there is desire that you need to help someone, consciousness will give you the opportunity, which means it will create that dream image that shows someone who needs help or saving, and then you will have to get involved with them to save them, because your desire is to save them. Your desire is to have compassion, to demonstrate compassion. And that's a fine desire. It's a better desire than being a murderer, in a relatively speaking. But in the overall scheme of things, if you have that desire to help people, that's still a desire, and that's why you take rebirth, because you have a desire that someone or something needs help. In time, you start to see that everything is fine. A hard thing to swallow sometimes, I know, but everything is fine. But that's, again, when you go beyond the mind and the consciousness. It doesn't mean you don't do good things in the world. You can still give money to homeless people, and you can still be of service to the people around you and do a good job with your work. Why? Because that creates what's called an adorable karma, or an adorable conditioning. And they speak of this in Vedic Yoga. So if you're going to be here, you want to engage in actions that result in joy and happiness and peace. So if you're going to be here, then yes, you want to engage in these kinds of activities. But don't think that you're doing it out of some lofty compassion or devotion to God. God doesn't think that way. God is what you are all the time, and once you realize that, you get that too. So there is adorable karma, or adorable conditioning. And adorable conditioning, I like the way it was described in Vedic Yoga. They say adorable conditioning is like what Shiva or Vishnu or Brahma, where the gods have, because they are awake, but they're still embodied. And so their condition is considered adorable in the sense that it promotes liberation, the idea of liberation, and it promotes the realization of liberation. So the idea of gods and goddesses, positive things, charity, being of service, this is what's called adorable conditioning. It's still conditioning, but if you're going to be here, you might as well have that kind of conditioning. Okay, so a few more questions. So you sometimes have this desperate, uncontrollable longing for the supreme energy, like one misses a girlfriend. You don't know what to do at that time. So nothing in the world intrigues you, and one has to fulfill the daily duties to get through the karmic journey. Well, first of all, and this is a hard thing to say, if you have this uncontrollable longing, in my experience, you can use that and devote yourself to God or to a path. But in my experience, that's more of an indication of some sort of imbalance there, because it's in a sense admitting that you are incomplete. And the more you have, the more you maintain this sense of longing that you need to connect with a supreme energy, something greater than yourself, you will maintain this state, because since you want it and you are experiencing it, you're letting it happen, it's going to keep happening. So what's called for at that time is to meditate and contemplate on how you are complete and whole right now. What would it be like to know that you are complete and whole right now? That's what you have to do, because that is a type of conditioning that says there's something out there that I need to have, whether through meditation, through devotional practices, through devotion to a guru, that by doing that, it's going to give me this supreme energy. And I've got to tell you, the supreme energy is everywhere. It doesn't always show up the way you want it. It is the camera that I'm looking at. It is the food I eat. It is the air I breathe and you breathe. It is the lamp on my table. It is the books on my shelf. The people I see, those people that I hate, those people that I love, those people that I could care less about, all the animals in the world. That is the supreme energy. You look at it and you miss it every time, usually, because you think it's supposed to be something special. It's not anything special. And this is part of what the practice is really about, is we are enticed to begin the practice, the process, through great stories of supreme union and so on. It entices us. But the more we go, the more we start to see in everyday experiences and everyday thoughts that this is the supreme energy. And there's no need to go for it, to look for it, to unite with it. It's always there in every single thing. So if you come to a point where you have this extreme longing, or you don't feel that the world is that fulfilling, you need to find a way to engage yourself in the world, to see God here and now. See the divine, see yourself here and now, whatever you want to call it. And then you won't have to get through your karmic duties. You'll see that the work you are doing is just an expression of God. So this might not be asking your questions. This might not be answering your questions in the way that you want, but I'm answering based on my experience. And the more you chase something, the more you're going to, what's the word? The more you're going to create a situation where you need to chase it. Again, it's like that addictive thing. You get the drug once, and then they want to keep giving it to you, or you want to keep getting it. So that's the same premise, which is why I often think that there's karmic addiction. Not just like addicts, but we're addicted to being here, essentially. So you want to know if I went through a similar stage? Well, yeah, I went through a similar stage where I was asking these questions, where I was chasing this idea of uniting with the Supreme and looking for that one teacher and having it given to me by making myself worthy. Sure, I went through that. It was all right. But over the years, if you pay attention, you start to realize, again, it's the practice that's refining your consciousness. It's being able to sit and focus in meditation. I talked about this yesterday in the yogic meditation training class that I lead, that every meditation technique, every practice has one point, and that is to make your consciousness focused, which means that you're beyond distraction. So whether you're practicing bhakti yoga, or whether you're practicing mantra, or whether you're practicing pranayama, the point of it is to get yourself to focus on a specific area, a specific thing, to the exclusion of all else. Because the moment you can focus on one thing and hold it there, then you have the strength of consciousness to contemplate what is God, what am I, what is the infinite. And you can hold it there until you get the answer, until you figure it out. So I found that as life has gone on, that it's not about chasing these amazing experiences, that the amazing experiences are always right here, and that once we see it and experience it and accept it, then that idea of liberation becomes a real thing. The concept moves from, a concept to a direct experience, which really has nothing in relation to what we think the concept is. It's another question about how you can know the truth. As though, is there one particular system, one particular school, one particular truth? Well, again, in Vasishtha Yoga, there's a comment that wisdom comes from single-pointed devotion to one truth. It doesn't matter what that truth is. It doesn't matter what path you follow, as long as you are single-mindedly devoted to that truth. So you have to find a truth that you're willing to devote yourself to, essentially. And you have to follow it to the end. And it's just the same way with marriage or commitments. It's not about finding that perfect thing where everything works out great. It's about being devoted to something, someone, at the exclusion to all else. And that is where you get the kind of union that you're probably looking for. Or not, you don't get it. You realize it's been there all along. But you have to go through the process. That's part of the ripening of individualized consciousness. Just like we go through stages as a child, When we're a baby, we want certain things. When we're a 3-4-year-old, we want certain things. When we're a teenager, we think, fast cars and loud music, at least for me, is the best thing. And then you get older and you start thinking other things. So it's like there are these stages that you go through. Well, consciousness goes through them too, and people are at different points in that space. So keep that in mind, that we're working to ripen this consciousness. And also keep in mind that these are all just words, and they're allowing us to get a sense of what we need to do to move forward. And the reason I say that is because it's easy to say, well, this teacher said that, well, this teacher said that, and kind of getting this sort of back and forth about that. It's not about who said what. It's about figuring out who embodies the state of consciousness that you are interested in and following that example. Not to be them, not to model yourself after them, because that's a big trap. That's no good at all. Personal experience there. But to follow and do what you need to do to experience it for yourself. A few good examples. I remember a quote from Bruce Lee. He said, the task of any teacher is to save his pupils from his own influence. So remember that. If you have a teacher who's trying to overly influence you, well, you might want to watch that. But if you have a teacher who's interested in guiding you and pointing you in a direction, saying, go try it out, figure it out for yourself, keeping you safe, of course, not making you do anything stupid, that can be a good act to follow. Okay, so finally, so you don't have anyone to discuss this with, family or friends? Well, that's good, because talking to people is a surefire way to get confused. Are you overthinking or overanalyzing? Probably. Will it drive you crazy one day? Well, hopefully it'll drive you good crazy. But overall, in a lot of these texts like Vasistha Yoga and the Bhagavad Gita, well, what happens? Well, Arjuna is depressed. Rama is depressed because they're seeing something that they have to work through. And then they have to do what needs to be done to work through it. So when you ask, will it drive you crazy one day? Well, it's possible. But it will only drive you crazy so long as you keep trying to figure it out with your mind. Your mind can only take you so far. It's okay, let it take you as far as it needs to go, but at some point there needs to be a feeling of safety to where you can just let go of the mind and see what's there. Once you can let go of the mind and see what's left, then you've, what I might consider, have jumped off the diving board, and they're going to have to start learning how to swim. But it's a good space to be in. Sometimes it's scary, but once you get enough of the mind stuff, then you need to learn to let go of the mind. So you need the mind for things in this world, to act appropriately, to think about things, to pay your bills, to interact with people in an appropriate fashion. But when it comes to knowing God and the divine and what you are, the mind is not going to help you too much. The mind is a tool, and what you are is this infinite consciousness. And so we need to learn to experience a safe place or a safe state, which is why when you meditate, it's good to have a place where you go all the time, where everything's fine. You don't have to worry. You can just meditate and contemplate. It's also good to meditate with people that you know is also a safe environment. And I mean people you know well. I'm not talking about going to meditation groups. That can be very helpful from time to time. But overall, meditation groups that are excessive and recreational and social, that will just lead to more confusion because you're getting caught up in other people's energy fields and thoughts and karmas, and you don't need that. So we're trying to get away from karma. You don't need anyone else's karma, right? Or at least we're trying to make karma less, affect us less. So this is the roundabout way of trying to answer your questions as best I could. Again, the key is meditation and contemplation and getting a hold of yourself. If you're feeling bad, depressed, if you need to go to a counselor to figure out what you can do to get beyond that, do it. If it's just a passing mood, do your best to go for a run, exercise, do something to get out of it, because you need to learn to gain control of your consciousness. And then ideally start seeing everything and everyone as this expression of yourself. Use the image of the dream, how everything in that dream is you. When you're asleep, all those things that are going on in your head and your consciousness, that's all you. There's no extra people in there doing anything. It's all created by you. Start contemplating, how can it be possible that this is also a dream? and you'll start to see it, and you'll start to get more peaceful. And these questions that you have to ask, they won't necessarily feel so important because you'll have innate knowing, understanding of being, of what's going on there. But as I've said in previous classes, that you do need to do the work. I do have a criticism for a lot of non-dualist teachers because a lot of people just say, just be here now. Good sentiment. Or, be present now. They have a lot of good teachings, so I'm not too critical. But what I found that causes the trip up is that they never typically give a formula, practice, or protocol to get you in a clear state so that you can move beyond these things. It's one thing to be here now while you're a total emotional wreck, and it's another thing to realize that you're not the emotional wreck and that you can do some things to get out of it so that you can contemplate in a clearer state of consciousness. So, yogic meditation, go to youtube.com/Kriya Yoga Online if you're not already there. youtube.com/Kriya